Yeah, so I was looking at my Alex Ross book. He's just a really talented illustrator. He uses gouache, by the way. But as I was looking through here, I don't talk about it often, but I have a nemesis. Just like Spider-Man. I just need to meet that nemesis head on. Well, hello, minders. Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Well, I'm sure you're probably curious about the title. Believe me, it's not clickbait. I really do have a nemesis, and I do want to talk about it because it might help others. When I say nemesis, it's something that kind of dogs me. I don't know, probably a problem that I create myself, but we'll get into that. Before I get into it, though, I just want to let you know this right here, what I'm working on, is the video I had intended to make. But due to some human error and a memory card mix-up, I accidentally deleted most of the footage. Yeah, that's, it happens on occasion. But as you'll find out, that kind of helped me go after my nemesis head on, at least this once. So let me just tell you what this is. This is actually some plein air that I did in my yard. We have 2 acres of wooded land, and there's really a lot that I can paint here, and I've done several videos from my yard. And the subject wasn't really as big a deal as I just wanted to practice process. So what I'm thinking here is almost completely process, and it's grouping of tree foliage, light tree foliage over dark backgrounds in sort of pleasing compositions. How do I approach it? How do I decide what I'm going to paint? How do I draw it out? What's the layering hierarchy I go through? So on and so forth. Am I going to mask? I usually don't mask on location. So that usually means how am I going to determine where the foliage goes and how I'm going to paint around it? All of this. This was a process study. So what is my nemesis? Well, before I specifically name it, let's just say that throughout the years, and I've been an illustrator for almost 35 years, I just love processes, especially early in my illustration career. I just loved discovering different media, how it worked, how to use it, loved discovering mixed media, how media would interact. And so I am a chronic experimenter. If you've been around my channel long, you've heard me say that before. I will test and I will try things, and I will test and try things again and experiment and experiment. The problem is I rarely ever spend a whole lot of time mastering one of them, at least not to the level that I could. I've gained proficiency in all these media just because of time, because I've been doing it for 40 years. And here, I'm just going to kind of tell you what's going on. I'm going to go out and remake this video. Yeah, I got to totally do the painting over again. But as you'll find out, that had some real advantages. Back to process. But if I didn't just focus so hard all the time on trying new things and tried to bear down on certain things, I think that I would probably be further in certain areas. I don't know if I'm making sense. So here's my nemesis. My nemesis is indecision, and it really is sometimes a problem. I'll get into doing a painting, and it doesn't have to be plein air, although it shows up the most when I'm doing plein air, because I feel like I've got limited time. I'm not as comfortable as I am sitting at my studio. I can't sit there and think about it and then walk away. And, I've got a limited bit of time to do this. So indecision, because I know so many ways to proceed through a painting, because I've tried so many ways, because I've tried so many media and approaches to drawing out the scene. Sometimes I can't decide which one I want to use. And it is a real problem sometimes, because as I start, I'll think, I don't want to do it this way. I don't want to do it that way. So I'll switch, or midstream, I'll start doing something else automatically that was not what I intended to do. Oh boy. Well, in this particular case, you can't see it, but the one in the upper right, and we'll be able to see it again later. The first version of this is going to be the same exact subject, same version. It will look a little different. But in that one, I drew it out, sort of roughly blocked in all the foliage shapes, the trees, not the background because it was going to be fairly nebulous. And I did that all with a pencil, actually a watercolor pencil, but that was only because I wanted it to disappear as I added washes. So yeah, I think through all these things, and it's a fairly standard way of approaching a painting. Get a pencil, roughly block in, your drawing, then start painting. It took me a while, and by the time I was done with it, and I'm still talking about the one you can barely see in the upper right. And by the way, what you see here is graphitint, and we'll get into that in a minute. That was the other process I wanted to try. And I've only got about 50 more that I want to try. So back to what I was saying. The one in the upper right was done the standard way with just blocked in roughly with a pencil. But it took a long time, longer than I wanted it to take. And I ended up doing a lot of tweaking in the studio. I'd like to see these paintings come along more quickly, actually on location, maybe even almost to a completion state. So naturally, I'm thinking again about process, how to be loose, more efficient. And this doesn't turn out to be all that much looser. But instead of a pencil and blocking in the shapes, I used a water brush and the graphitint palette. So the theory there is I use a lot of grays if I'm going to sketch in with a water brush, and that's what I was doing here. And it's great because when I use the brush to sketch in, I mix up a lot of grays, and that really kind of cut out the step of me having to mix grays. So I thought, okay, by the way, here's the subject. And I'm almost having to make up the lighting and the contrast because that light changed constantly, even from the 2 different days. But so yeah, graphitint, which is, it's just colored graphite. And I brushed in the basic shapes and position of everything. And then I started painting. And I was much happier with the process. Just much, much happier. I suppose there was some comfort that I felt after having painted this scene once already. And that's another kind of point that I can make. There's a lot of benefit in it. Sometimes it's difficult to do because I get bored with painting the same subject over and over. But again, it's very valuable. If you're wanting to master a subject, it's worth doing and thinking through the process of how you did it. So I have pretty much painted around all the foliage shapes now. And I'm coloring those areas that were put in with graphitint. I'm adding some leaf color to them. And I liked this process. I ended up getting from point A to point B much faster. And when I left the yard and went into my studio, it was nearly finished. I really did not have to do much else in the studio. Also felt like the background washes behind the tree and the foreground foliage were fresher. They felt fresher to me. A little more color variegation, which I liked. But in general, I just love the process so much more. So I guess what I'm saying is what I was forced to do because of deleting the footage that I intended to make into a video, what I was forced to do is redo this whole thing and just reminded myself of how valuable that is and how valuable it is to think through your process. And that's really the way to defeat this nemesis. Not necessarily have to paint something over and over, but that you decide on a process before you start and stick to it. I have such a hard time doing that. Such a hard time. Actually, it's been one of the blessings of my channel. So here we go. These are comparing the two final ones. And here is the way the lighting ended up. Totally different from what it was before. Let's go inside and take a final look at these. All right, well, I've come inside. I have done some final tweaks here, basically just increasing contrast. I really didn't add anything. You can see a little bit of opaque leaves just in a few places where just to sort of fill out some spots, but for the most part, it's all transparent. This was the previous session, the one I opened up with. Let me just say there is so much benefit in doing this and doing the same scene over. I know that it can get boring doing the same scene more than once, but you can see there's a lot of differences. And believe me, I am one that's easily bored and loses interest in a subject if I've not done it well, or, you know, it's just not interesting me anymore. But I really had fun with this. And as we talk about, you know, processes and the indecision, this was real therapy, because I see a lot of things and a lot of things happen in the process here that I'm really happy with. There was a fresher, more immediate approach. I got to this point quicker than I did here. This took a lot more tweaking in studio before I was happy with it. And while they may both look acceptable, this just here represented a lot more process discovery, if you will. So yeah, I guess what I'm saying is, if you have the similar nemesis as indecision, and there's so many ways you can go with something, that sometimes you just need to sit down and work through those processes, decide which ones work best for you. You may be the type of painter that just immediately settles on a particular process, and that's what you do. It's all you do. Some artists are like that. I think it's just not been that way for me. I have such a tendency to experiment and try different things, and it turns around to bite me sometimes. I hope you all enjoyed this and got something from it. Let me know down in the comments, what's your nemesis? What's the thing that you battle with all the time? And we'll see everybody in the next video. Bye-bye.